Welcome to the Property Experts podcast, where you'll find open conversations, no bullshit attitudes, and deep dive insights from award-winning property developers and business owners, Ben Richards and Jack Jiggins. Together, they've delivered over 40 million in gross development value over the last 5 years and have a pipeline of over 25 million to deliver in the next 18 months. They've built numerous other seven-figure businesses with six-figure net profits around their property ecosystem, and it's by no means been an easy ride. So on this podcast, they'll share their weekly trials and tribulations running multiple businesses, giving you never-before-seen insights into the inner workings of finding, funding, designing, delivering, and selling award-winning property deals, together with golden nuggets of advice through the 5 key areas of any business: marketing, sales, operations, finance, and talent. If you're a young entrepreneur looking to get started, or have a small team but you're looking to scale your business to the next level, this is the No Bullshit podcast for you. Hello, and welcome to the Property Expert Show with me, Ben Richards, and Jack Jiggins from XP Property. Thanks for tuning in. If you are new, we talk about all the issues in serial entrepreneurship and property development in the UK. We've got numerous businesses, 6, 7, and 8-figure businesses that we've grown and built over the last 6 years. And these weekly video calls and podcasts, we talk about what's happening this week, all the trials and tribulations, and how hopefully we can help you learn from those things and stop you making the same mistakes and learning how to do things correctly, and all of the wealth of knowledge and experience that we've got over the last couple of years doing this. So thanks for tuning in. On the agenda today, Jack is joining us from Vegas, baby. So he's over there for a stag do. He's not quite doesn't have a sore head yet because festivities hasn't fully started yet, but I'm sure by this time tomorrow you'll be all over the place.
Yeah, it's 7 a.m. here and it's already like 32 degrees. Yeah, that photo that you can see there for the watchers is actually the view out of our room. We're in the Cosmopolitan, and that's the Bellagio fountain and the new Sphere, which is the 3D dome that's digitalized. Pretty cool.
Decent views. I like that a lot. Yeah, I hope you have an amazing time. We are, a bit of a spoiler alert, recording this because Friday, Saturday and Sunday Jack will be enjoying himself. Let's leave it at that. But it does mean that today is actually my birthday. So yeah, we're pre-recording this on my birthday and Jack's doing all the celebrating for me tomorrow in Vegas.
We can't get the date wrong today, can we?
No, exactly. On the agenda today, it's technically the 27th of September by the time this goes out. We are talking about property deals and what's happening in the market. Jack's been hunting for our pipeline into 2025 and 2026. So he's going to be running through what he's seeing at the moment in the market. We have boots on the ground, where things are from a financing perspective, from a deal opportunity perspective, what vendors' expectations are, and all that good stuff that will help you to find profitable deals in the property space. When is the right time to hire? We're recruiting in XP surveys for a CAD technician, and we're going to be discussing between us when we think the right time is to hire in any business. We're also recruiting in XP Property. So Christina, who is the person that pulls all of these things together for us with the slides and the StreamYard video and the podcast audio format, all that sort of stuff. She is swanning off to travel the world, which sounds amazing. We wish her all the best with that. But it means that we are looking to fill her spot by bringing in an office and estate manager into the XP Property group. So if you're interested or you know anyone interested in that role, then do reach out. Number 4, phasing projects. Why do we phase our projects like we do? And we're going to be talking about the pros and cons of doing that. Number 5, big changes over the last couple of years with the Building Safety Act, which is brought in recently. I'm going to be discussing how it's affecting me from a architectural and a property development perspective. Jack's got some wise words about time and money. Intrigued to understand more about that. And then we've been getting more sales in St Andrew's Court, which is absolutely phenomenal. So, it might lead on from Jack's point number 1, which is about kind of property deals and what's happening in the market. But we are starting to see a bit of a pickup, which sounds like it's great news. So yeah, without further ado, let's crack on. And Jack's going to be talking about property deals and what's happening in the market. But actually, before that, if you are enjoying these podcasts, do make sure you rate us on Spotify, drop a review on Apple, drop some comments into the YouTube channel because it all helps with the algorithm and it helps to get us out there speaking to new people. So please do share this with one person that you think might get value from it as well.
Lovely. Deals. So yeah, we're kind of always looking for projects. I was chatting to someone the other day and it was actually Ronnie, our investor, and he was sort of saying, are you fully subscribed? Are you always looking for deals? And quite frankly, we're always looking for projects. The more we have on our plate or the more pipeline that is full, we just improve the margins on how offers go out. So we try and then push for higher margin projects, so to speak. But I just wanted to break this down into the office market, the land market, the residential market, and planning generally, and then rentals, and what we're seeing in the market, because it is a changing landscape. Starting off with the office space, there's a snippet there for the viewers. Amazon have insisted on their staff go back into the office for 5 days a week. And we're starting to see this across Barclays, Santander Bank. A lot of big corporates are pushing for their teams to go back into the office to drive efficiency because they're not getting it from home. It does shock me sometimes that businesses of a large scale can operate where, you're not necessarily in the office for most of the week. Now we're starting to see this. So we're hopeful that the office market does stabilize and pick up. It has been a bit dry for the last few years when everyone's been going around the flexible working. I think fundamentally, generally, less office space is required because a lot of people have more hybrid roles and come in on flexible rather than maybe 1,000-person office for a big corporate. They might only need 600 desks, and sort of tally how that desk space actually works. It is good for the, I suppose, office and commercial developers out there, but bad obviously for the resi developers because we like taking office buildings that are, maybe not required anymore and repurposing them for residential. Where I do feel that these office spaces do have opportunity for developers and residential developers is a lot of the big corporates are sort of consolidating their spaces. So the buildings that we've bought in Abingdon, Tame, they might not be primary locations for big office spaces to operate anymore. And they might just, for an example, focus purely on an Oxford office and then sort of rescind their leases in those other areas so that the employees going to those office spaces might actually just go into the office a few times in Oxford. The commute, granted, isn't ideal, but they're not in every day of the week. So the sort of suburb towns, I think there's huge opportunity for. We've already been implementing that, and I think there's a really good opportunity for residential developers to be buying up large-ish office buildings. So large, I'm talking sort of between 3,000 and 25,000 square feet buildings in sort of secondary areas where it is better suited for residential. And we've, for an example, in Tame, we were trying to pull out comparables to prove, which I actually talked about in the Tame episode special, which I think is our top viewed episode. We'll put the episode number in the show notes. And we couldn't find any comparables because there wasn't any central town location offices that were being converted to flats. There isn't even any new build flats. The only comparable product that was new build was actually a Churchill retirement home. So everything in Tame is houses. So that's the sort of pockets that we look for, sort of really good locations or affluent market towns where offices are not necessarily potentially needed anymore. And if you are in the office space and taking up those offices, you could always looking at splitting them further so they're smaller suites rather than large, office spaces that we required. We were bidding on a site actually in Woking, which is a huge building. I think it was something like 30,000 square feet. And they were struggling to let the office space because it was so large, but then they sliced it up per floor and had a wing off each floor, and they started to then refill that space up. So in the office space, it is good to sort of consolidate and cut down the sizes, which is kind of what we've done for Tame, sort of re-gear those leases, push the pound per square foot up, but reduce the cost for a company to be operating from there. Anything to add on office spaces, Ben?
No, I think you've covered all of it, to be honest. I still think, like you say, if the people are going from like 1,000-person office to a 600-person office, it does create a lot of opportunity for developers like us because there is still a lot of office stock with Class MA permitted development rights available to them to convert into resi, which is going to drive the resale pound per square foot value up and is ultimately what as a small developer you're looking for. So yeah, I think there's lots of opportunity in that space still.
And for SME property developers where we don't have necessarily construction in-house, it's actually a really competitive space for us to be in because it is technically a fit out. It's not, a construction ground up build. Therefore, you can be competitive on the tender perspective as well, which kind of segues us nicely onto the land market. I think the land market is forever getting more difficult. Our costs are going up as builders. The land values are constantly going down. People think that buy land now and it'll be worth more in the future. Yeah, granted, if you get the planning to change its use, it will be. But when you look at sort of all the BNG contributions that you've got to make, Section 106 agreements, the SIL payments, the finance costs that are increasing, the stamp duty, everything is making all of the other costs greater. And the old age rule that land used to cost a third of what you used to exit the site for is nowhere near where actually reality is. It's more or less, I think if you're buying a site about 10% to GDV, you've done well. And then it sort of does cap out before 20% now. So you really got to focus. And the biggest issue I find with land is sometimes that, the vendor needs to be, his values need to be managed expectations, because when our costs are going up, they've probably had someone down the pub tell them it's worth £1 million, when in actual fact, you're building a 3 million GDV scheme, you've probably got to be buying that sort of 500, 600K, and the expectations are not there yet. Sounds cringy, but I was watching Selling Sunset the other day, and one of the guys that runs the industry was quoting on a house, and the vendor wants to list it at 20 million, for an example, and he thinks it's worth less than 20 million. And he's actually said, let another agent take it on, let it sit on the market for 6 months, and then we'll come back to them when they're willing to put it on for the right price. So it's kind of like an open market change that needs to happen, where land values do need to keep coming down. The office space is slightly different because you've got a different use, but land is, whether it's a Equestrian centre or whether it's a farmer's field, it's not going to be worth much in that capacity. So the values have to change. And then obviously we'll come on to planning, but that's one of the biggest issues with it, actually getting the consent on it and getting it pushed through. The larger the site, the better, because councils are focusing on larger sites because it's a better return on their time to get the units approved rather than focusing on the little bitty sites. They focus on the large swarms of land that might be sort of 500 units plus, because that is helping them hit their targets rather than helping the broad and sort of local developers, the SME developers, deliver what we need to. There is a stat, I think it's since 2015, the SME development space is actually delivering half of what we used to, and I'd put most of that down to planning. Onto the resi market, it's been pretty terrible, quite frankly, as in terms of volume of transactions, actually value of transactions. The market value hasn't necessarily softened so much, which is pretty peculiar. You kind of like being advised by agents to not necessarily drop the price of your property, but just stick it out. It's difficult because a lot of stuff is sticking on the market. I think there's a record high of the most cottages for sale in Henley at this moment in time. So 3-4 bed cottages are like 50 cottages for sale. And that makes it difficult for everyone because the buyers have got a choice. So it's definitely still a buyer's market. And we'll be giving you a little bit of a snippet on how Thames getting on, because that's kind of the contrary, I suppose. If you're buying residential buildings, we really, really, really struggle to make anything work. If it's a development and you're buying resi, stamp duty is extremely high on that purchase. There's a rule of thumb that if you're knocking down a residential building, you should be replacing it for 3. I think this market's super difficult. And I actually think that moving on to the sort of last topic of this, the rentals, HMOs, that's a way better space to be when you're buying residential properties at the moment. The sort of general sentiment, we try and avoid resi stuff unless it's got significant value of over 3 units potential. Land, I think, is a difficult space. You've got to catch it really early. You've got to work on it for years. You've got to get it through consent. And that's all providing that you actually agree a fair value for the land. Maybe going down the promote route is a better route for land at the moment. So a promote structure is where you have an agreement with the landowner where you're kind of JVing, you're holding the hand through the planning process and funding that, and then exiting to someone else and splitting that upside after the costs. That's a very fair way to go about it, so to speak. Yeah, then on to planning. And this is the reason why I think the office space is so good, because as Ben alluded to earlier with Class MA, it is a much faster and easier route for developers like us to actually get something consented on site. It is absolutely mind-boggling how long some applications take. I mean, we had basically a ramp in Croydon that took almost by most part. It wasn't a huge application. And when you put that in context that we've got planning to convert buildings to 20 apartments within a few months, it is crazy. So we try and avoid full planning if we can. If we're not able to go around the full planning route, for example, it might be listed or it might not be a fall under the sort of rights of Class MA, we would try and push that as a conditional purchase contract so that the time spent in planning is actually sat on the vendor's watch, which sometimes works. They might be renting it out and getting a rental income. If it's vacant, that's obviously quite a lot more difficult to get agreed. But that's where we're still seeing a sort of value going down the route or focusing on the sort of national policies where the government are pushing for hitting housing land supplies rather than relying on the local districts and definitely the local councils that seem to have issues with most things. Any on those that have, from your perspective, Ben, that I've touched on?
I think you've nailed it. I think the planning process needs a whole reform, which we've spoken about in the past. Labour adding a basically less than one person per council around the UK with their pledge to sort of bring 300 new planning consultants, planning officers into the mix. I don't think it's really going to scratch the surface. But yeah, it's painful process. So like you say, if you can skirt around the full planning via the permitted development routes as a fallback, like we're using permitted development on some of our sites as a fallback position. So securing those approvals, but then going back with a full plan to enhance the scheme, which adds significant value, but you've de-risked it because you've already got that fallback position in place with the PD. So there's various things you can do. And if anyone's looking at some schemes, I'd happily chat through my views on what you're planning to do and see if there's any ways in which I think you could structure it in a different way or phase it in a different way to make sure that you give your best chance of success at planning. But no, I think you've nailed it. The rental properties from a rent level perspective, they're at the highest they've ever been. So, if you are holding stock on the rental market, you're in a good position from an income perspective, but then you've got to tackle the challenges of high interest rates and all that sort of stuff if you're buying with mortgages. So it's a real shitstorm.
Yeah, just to touch on that we're focusing on the Class MA planning, another really good space in the market, which we're actively looking for projects that fall into this. And this is actually exactly what St Helens Mill block of 14 flats that we basically renovated every flat that was already there. You're negating the requirement to go down the planning route. And it's actually quite a area of the market. This is quite a good cheat sheet that not a lot of people look at because it's kind of not enough work for a developer, but it's too much work for an investment company. So you're in this gap where you're kind of like developer, investor, all one. And that's actually on the Goldman Sachs Business Growth Program. That's one thing that I think XP Property excel as one of our sort of skill sets, that we can kind of do anything with anything, and blurring the lines between, okay, it's 14 existing flats. If we buy it at 70p in the pound and we renovate all the units and add the value so it's 1.2 pound in the p, then that's like creating obviously that margin that's for us. So that's a really good space that I'd recommend looking at. So maybe stuff that looks a little bit dry and a bit boring, but got some asset management play in there. And then obviously you're negating the requirement necessarily for planning. Obviously, we'll look at planning on every site to see if there's ways we can enhance it and how that phases into the site, which we'll talk about later on in today's episode. And then rentals and HMOs and sort of house flips. So smaller projects, I think it's a really good space. We're finding a lot more projects that are actually priced right in the house market, where it's been a bit stagnant and it is buyer's market. We're looking for obviously projects to convert to 6-bed HMOs is our sort of preferred route. And obviously we've got the doctor's surgery, which we're converting as sort of cluster HMOs. But I think that if you can buy larger-ish buildings, houses and or small commercial buildings, and just try and get it for a good pound per square foot in value, and then obviously convert it to HMOs and refinance. We are struggling with interest rates where they are to make sort of 4 and 5 bed HMOs work really well, but we're still making sort of larger ones work. There have been a few anomalies where we've got a few sites we're actually delivering a 6-bed, due to deliver a 6-bed in Central Suites, and the market values are okay to be buying in that space. I think that is quite a good space to be operating in. So to sort of summarise, office space because of planning, and it is a changing market from an office perspective, maybe in secondary locations. Land, I think, is a difficult space unless you're really well geared up. Obviously, it's got to be part of your wheelhouse because there's good margins in the new build sites and taking it through planning. But we're focusing a lot more time on existing buildings. Resi market, buy and get planning, I think, is a difficult space because of the residential values of the stamp duty to be paid. And when you're knocking things down, you're obviously losing value. Try and avoid planning if you can. And then the rental space is good. So I think hopefully there's a few snippets in there. And we're seeing that that's kind of where we're navigating to. And we are open to looking at sites. So if you've got anything that you might want to potentially collaborate on, reach out to us. We'll help to show you sort of learn how we would review that project and see if it's something we could do together.
You see on that asset management thing, because I think it's a really good way you see a lot of people come out of these education platforms. They talk about BRR, buy, refurbish, refinance, that sort of stuff. What we do from an asset management perspective, like we did with St Helens Mill, is effectively that on steroids, isn't it? It's just, instead of just doing one of those, it's 14 of them all in one block, where you've got the value of scale all in one place. Management, you can do things like we did with St Helens Mill, where we move tenants around and only do a few at a time, so you're not losing rent roll and all that sort of stuff. So I think it's massive. Have you seen institutional bodies sort of relinquishing some of their stock in that respect? There are these asset management plays out there at the moment. Are you seeing any institutional?
Yeah, I'm not seeing many institutional players actually exiting their stock because I think the commercial and yield space has softened slightly. They're obviously playing a kind of almost like a trading game. They're getting in at the market and trading a yield in a future period and taking the income. Is it a bit loud in there? We've got
It's not too bad, actually.
Conference.
Yeah, it's right.
What we are seeing is the institutions, I don't think, are willing to exit their stock and crystallise that loss yet. We've seen a few, bits and bobs are about on the market, but I think they're holding tight. Obviously, cash flow is king for them, and they're probably waiting for a slightly better market to exit that position if they were looking to do that. Where I think there's a huge opportunity is the unprofessional landlords that actually own quite big buildings. And in sort of touching on that asset management play, we're currently trying to bid on a site. I obviously won't disclose where it is at the moment, which is basically, I think, 5 retail units all on the ground floor. And it's got 5 apartments above it that are really weird. They're like duplex flats all the way along it. The retail space is underlet and some of it is actually vacant. The uppers is underlet and tired. You could probably get another story on the building. So it's all about that, like manufacturing that, creating that deal. So you'd go in, buy the site, read all the leases, fill the empty spaces. You might have to throw a bit of capex at that to let them. And then you would one by one, or as many as you can get into, refurbish the apartments. And I was thinking convert them into sort of 5-bed HMOs because they are big. And then you ended up again with 25 bedrooms with retail on the ground floor, and you might put another story on it and then refinance it. And you would have something like St Helens Mill where you're pulling out all your equity, and it's a bit ugly, and it is quite an ugly building. It kind of looks like 60s build. It kind of looks a little bit council housey around the back, and it needs that new lease of life, which is kind of like, again, like I said, like the verge between investor and developer, which I think is a space that we sort of do quite well. And I'd recommend people look into that space. And you've already got an underlying asset there. You don't have to mess around with, ground up risk or getting utilities on site and things like that.
Nice. Cool. Like it. So on to number 2, we are recruiting for a CAD technician in XP Surveys. If you understand how to use AutoCAD, if you're interested in things like point cloud technology, laser scanning, measured building surveys, topographical surveys, we'd love to have a chat with you. We've been doing interviews all of this week and some last week, and we've got a few more to book in for next week. So we're still on the hunt. We will be looking to make a decision on a chosen candidate in the next sort of few weeks. But if you are listening to this or you know someone that's interested, get them to send their CV through to us at info@xpsurveys.co.uk. You can find the job description on LinkedIn and Indeed. And Christina, if you could put the link in the description, show notes, then that will be great for people to click on and take a look at what we have to offer. Which leads us on to the next point, which we want to sort of touch on, which is when is the right time to hire? This is something that I think you wanted to have a quick chat about, wasn't it, Jack?
Yeah. So it was actually driven from a conversation that I had with Amy, who's our office business manager in XP Surveys. We are looking for a CAD technician, and we also are open to training someone up, whether it's a college student, and we've actually had conversations with Henley College, or whether it's an apprentice type role, or even sort of after and it's full-time employment and training someone up. And she was a bit hesitant, obviously coming from a background where she worked in a estate agency. You sort of get in, you need to be a fee earner, and it's something that you can pick up quite quickly. But surveying isn't. Surveying is something you do need to learn and skill up and practice and shadow other people. So, for example, our lead surveyor, Oscar, said he spent about a year until he was fully capable independently to do topographical surveys with all the kit that is required and to draw it all up. So to have those conversations now with Henley College, Amy's view was like, well, we're so busy and the guys haven't got time to train someone. And I'm like, well, if we don't, bite the bullet now, we're going to always be in that position. We're always going to be overwhelmed and too much work going on, not having people in the team learning and working around others. So it's thinking about when and roles, some, fee-earning roles, you do need to consider whether you go for someone more experienced, and I believe we talked about it before, someone more experienced who just hits the ground running and starts generating revenue for the business, but then also training someone up. Obviously, our sort of 2D and topographical stuff is quite technical, but the laser scanning kit that goes on site for the 3D stuff is fairly easy to sort of pick up and learn. And I think within sort of 4 to 5 site visits with one of our surveyors, they would be, almost independent to go out and do that themselves. So then learning and shadowing on the sort of CAD stuff. So just to think about when someone's going to be coming in is quite important. So if it's a more junior role, what have you got to lose to bring someone in to start learning, be in the office and pick things up? But that was the process we sort of talked about in the office. And I was kind of like, if we don't do it now, it's never going to happen. We're always going to be hiring experience, never going to have anyone shadowing and learning that we've sort of trained up. But then, for an example, when Ben and I featured on James Sinclair's business podcast for XP Surveys, he was like, why don't you hire a business development manager if you're struggling with sales? And we're like, well, we don't know if we can afford it. And he's like, well, if you can cover their salary for 3 months and the expectations is that salesperson is generating more revenue within 3 months, if you lose, having a understanding of who's coming into the business, when they should come in, and quite frequently it's less risky to have another overhead into the business, and you've got to think about it that way too.
Yeah, I think I will always look on like a 3-month time scale, really. And it goes back to some of our financial management things that we've discussed in the past about having a cash flow forecast of some kind. XP Surveys is difficult because month by month, it's such a quick turnover that month by month, we are getting new projects in that there's very little repeat and regular income. We need the survey done in 3 days' time. Fine, we'll book that in. It's not like we've got a book of work for 3 months that we know is coming in. Whereas Aura, for example, we can, to a certain degree, forecast forward 3 months. So if I look forward 3 months and I see a really big, heavy revenue month, which means more resource month, then I really need to start thinking about, okay, do I start that recruitment process now? Because recruiting takes time. It might take you a week to kind of get a job description and stuff out there and in the ethos. You might be scouring through submissions of CVs for 2 weeks, have 2 weeks further of actual interviews, then a second stage interview. And then you've got to get, if that person you're bringing in is on a notice period, you've got that notice period to kind of ride out as well. So you could actually be 3 months before actually, starting from launching the job advert to actually getting them starting and sat down at the desk ready to work. So you've got to plan for that, and having a cash flow forecast that helps you kind of achieve that is a great way of doing it. With XP Surveys, to a certain degree, kind of hopeful that the work, we've had 2 really good months and then 1 softer month. But Trevor coming in as business development manager is really starting to, we see the growth projections and the opportunity of more revenue coming in because of the relationships that we're building and the types of jobs that we're now winning. So it's now the time to bring in an extra person to help out with the operational side of stuff. But yeah, it's going to be all down to the individual job role itself, how your business is structured, but also having, good cash flow management and forecasting in place is always going to help you understand when you need to hire a new person. And on that note, I mentioned at the start, Christina's off around the world doing her own thing. So we are replacing Christina, who currently does an office and sort of management, marketing manager role. We have decided to kind of split that role. We're going to bring out marketing completely and kind of fulfill that role elsewhere. So the role that we're now looking to recruit for is an office and estate manager. We've got a big delivery process over the next 9 months with 65 houses and flats being delivered. Some of them we're retaining, some of them we're selling. We've also got a portfolio of existing stock, which needs some sort of management. There's a refurb in one of our projects in Reading that we want to do because the tenant's left. All of that sort of stuff, we want an estate manager on board to help with going forward. And that estate manager can wrap up all of the office admin and the events coordination, CRM management, sort of email monitoring as well as part of that role. So if that sounds of interest, we are an award-winning property developer based in London and the home counties. Our office is in Henley-on-Thames, which is where you'd be positioned full-time. And it's an exciting place to work. Every team member that we do a review with, when we say, what do you enjoy the most? They always say the team. There's the wider group of businesses that we tap into as well. So there's about 30 people in amongst Aura, XP Property, XP Surveys, Central Suites. So you'd be coming into a really, great place to work. Got lots of exciting projects on the go. We have lots of social activities and external extracurricular stuff that we do. So if you are interested in joining that type of business, we would love to work with you. And if you want to see some of the stuff that we've been working on, XP Property are doing a site tour on the 17th of October between 12 and 5 p.m. If you go to bit.ly/XP tour, you can find out all of the details on that. We're going to the Old Maltings, which is around about £7 million GDV development of 21 flats and 2 houses. St Andrew's Court, which is around about similar £7.5 million GDV of 20 flats and 6,000 square foot of commercial space. And then we've got West Street Marlow, which is 8 flats, which is the conversion of a Grade 2 listed office and a dance studio into 8 flats. And that's going to be coming to the market in Christmas time. So all of these projects are at various stages. All are office to residential conversions of some kind. So if you're interested in that space, like we've talked about before, using Class MA and permitted development rights, do come on the site tour. We'll show you around. You can answer as many questions as you want. And Jack and I will do our best to answer them.
Yeah, I was just going to touch on that. A lot of people in the industry could charge a few £100 to do this day tour, but we just charge a commitment fee, and all the profits that we would make go to charity. So we more do it to sort of round the business, meet new faces, answer questions. Maybe you might have some ideas that we can implement to our site, but there's a lot that you can learn off these 3 sites, all at different stages, and how we've, phased the sites, bought the sites, funded the sites, how we've achieved the planning, how we've gone through the sort of tendering process and getting the contract lined up, and also how we're selling the units.
Yeah, nice. We'd love to see you there. On to number 4, phasing. So why phase stuff? This is something that we do a lot of. I've got a kind of a list of a few pros and cons to this process, but Jack, I know you wanted to kind of touch on this, so you crack on first, then I'll hopefully add some gems in there.
Yeah, I mean, this actually came, the idea of why phasing is I've been sort of helping a fellow developer analyse a project and sort of basically run a full analysis as if I was looking at it. It's actually based up in South Northampton, but it's quite a large site. I think it's about 90 units that's split across a grade 2 listed building that's up for conversion, a new build block of flats and new build houses all on one site. And then it's about a third in terms of like the value split between the site. And the first thing that I thought, even before I'd run the numbers on the spreadsheet, is if you attack the existing building first, which is the lumpier part that you're probably paying more pound per meter to buy, if you tackled that part, you're kind of negating a lot of your finance costs. So I worked out that if you bought the site, developed the whole site all in one go, and then exited the site, you'd probably have a finance cost of about 2.8 million. And I think if you phased the site, yes, it would be a longer project. And actually that then means you're borrowing debt for longer. But the way that that's then phased, so your debt facility against the development facility is actually lower because you're exiting parts while you're delivering parts, actually reduces the finance cost down by about 30%, which is like 800 grand. So just look at, when you're looking at sites, don't necessarily think that you always have to develop every single corner of it at the exact same time, because it's a big lumpier contract, it take longer. There are obviously economies of scale and benefits to that because your contractor can set up site and they're there and, present and can do what they need to do. But there's also merit in thinking about how you go about tackling the scheme and how you phase that part of the building, exactly like we've done with the scheme, if you can see it, which is our Tame site. There's so much phasing in it, and it's kind of a pain in the arse when you're explaining it to an investor or a bank or whoever it may be, an underwriter or a bank. But the fundamentals are, when you actually get your head around, the numbers are stronger and you reduce finance costs. You also reduce risk. Your rent roll that you're taking in certain areas pays for the finance costs or running costs. And also you're maximising on the debt facility that you're pushing across different parts. So, for this particular site, we'd hope that we've sold most of the 9 units while we're delivering the neighbouring part of the site, which is, again, chipping away the finance costs that we're running. And if we hadn't finished those 9, we'd be in a much longer delivery for the whole site. So it's just something to think about and why we do it. And yes, it is quite complicated, but that's what we get paid for.
It is, yeah. I mean, those are all valid points. I've got a few other sort of pros and cons, I guess. One of the pros that you just didn't touch on is actually the added value in that, some of that phasing. Like if we're going back in for planning enhancements, Section 73 amendments to, like we did on Tame, add extensions to private amenity, balconies, gardens, terraces, all that sort of stuff adds loads of value to and increases the saleability of the existing kind of office conversion. Jack mentioned it there. It's kind of, yes, it reduces your interest costs, but it also deleverages the site for you by doing so. If you're selling assets as you're developing the rest of the site, you're lowering your interest costs, you're lowering your debt. Because you've increased the value, you've actually deleveraged. So a bank should be a lot happier with kind of the asset itself because it's a lower loan to value. You're also, because of the added value and that deleverage, you're creating yourself more of a buffer. So if things do go wrong in later phases or your bill costs escalate, 10%, 15%, whatever it may be, that value that you've added, it might balance out that extra cost. So instead of being 15% off your profit margin, for example, you're still at the same levels as you started because you've added the value with the extra changes that you've made. Some of the cons that you will find by phasing project is the disruption to the program. So Jack mentioned it is complex. You do really have to be on it. Your technical team have to be really able to spin a lot of plates to make sure that you're thinking ahead. We're doing utilities on Tame at the moment where we're thinking, right, the utilities company only, as far as they're concerned, are installing 9 units, and they're increasing their, installing cabling and water pipes and stuff like that for 9 units. But we know we've got another 11 coming down the line. So we have to make provision for that without necessarily sort of fully detailing it with the utilities company. So, you have to have a good understanding of utilities and the site and how things are being brought in. And it can disrupt the program, and it can disrupt the program not just for you, but your contractor. Your contractor just wants to get in, get their job done, and move on. Whereas if there's a phased approach, it adds a lot more complication to them, which you have to work with the right team to make that happen. Funding issues is another con in terms of banks and lenders getting their heads around some of this phasing. I remember when we did Hyde End Road like 4 or 5 years ago, getting a bank to understand what the hell we were trying to do by extending and converting part of the office at the front, keeping the residential and refurbishing the residential, extending the offices at the back, keeping the offices as offices. It was a whole rigmarole to try and get their heads around it. All they really want is an open field where they're building 17 houses and they know what they're going to end up with. Whereas a lot of the schemes that we do have this phasing to it, whereby it does take a bit of thought and sort of getting your head round. So there's pros and cons to both. I feel like we've maybe come unstuck with times where we have tried to push a little bit too much, where maybe we should have just delivered the original scheme and not wasted the time with the risk of the planning. Like Sunset Court, I think, is a good example of that, where maybe in hindsight we could have just delivered the plans that were originally approved and sold faster and got our money out a lot quicker. But ultimately we're developers. Our goal is to add value, and that's what we should really be trying to do.
Yeah, cool. I was also just going to touch on it is a nightmare trying to explain this sometimes, and the best thing you can do, whether it is the bank underwriter or the investor, because Tame was more difficult to communicate what was going on. It just takes them to site, because as soon as someone there visualizes it and understands it, it's way easier to sort of digest how we're doing it.
Yeah.
If you're excited by some of the property developments or investments that we talk about on this show and want to know more about investing £100,000 or more with XP, email info@xpproperty.co.uk to set up a call with one of our team. We can discuss our open investment opportunities and provide you with our track record details, showing with complete transparency our historic performance project by project and how you could be part of our growing pipeline of developments.
Cool. I won't spend too long on this because it's very dry and I've heard enough about it, if I'm completely honest. It's the Building Safety Act. But if you haven't heard of this at the moment, you need to understand it, because it's a massive change. It's the biggest change in sort of building safety, building regulations since I've been really involved in construction over the last 15 years. And it's been brought in since the Grenfell inquiry, and we all know what happened there. So the government have tried to introduce this Safety Act to shake things up, do things slightly differently. And I'm going to give you a little bit of a quick sort of whiz through the main changes that you might find from your perspective. You'll see that the term approved inspector is no longer, and there is now the Registered Building Control Approvers, the RBCAs, and those people have to be signed off by the building regulator. And that's a whole process. There's been a lot of warranty providers and approved inspectors that have gone bust over the last year because they can't, they can't cope with this change, and they don't have the operational and sort of governance to manage it and do what's needed from what's being requested by the building regulator. So it's a big change. I'm not really sure how this is going to play out. There's a lot of talk about pushing everyone down the local, building control inspector or local registered building control approver route, which I don't think is in anyone's interest. My history of working with local council building controls has been horrendous over the last 15 years. That's why I always go to an approved inspector, where effectively it is a private company. They have to have efficiencies, they have to have good delivery of service, or they go bust and people don't use them. So, for me, that is a better way of working rather than a very slow and sluggish public sector kind of body. But anyway, improved inspectors are no longer. Registered building control approvers are the new way forward. But how does it affect me? I'm going to talk about two sides of it. I've got one, which is the Aura architecture side of it. And effectively what the Building Safety Act is doing is almost removing the responsibility from building control. Historically, if you had a problem or you had something that was a little bit a grey area, you would say, look, Mr. Building Control Body, and this is what I want to do. Are you accepting of this? They would say, yes, that is fine, actually, crack on, you do it, and away you go. What now they will say is, let's for argument's sake say, look, I've got this situation. I don't have the correct fire lobbies, or I don't have the right layout to achieve Part B building control for X, Y, and Z. this is what we're proposing to do. Can you approve this for us? They're not going to approve it. They're going to say, okay, what does your principal designer say? And what does your fire risk consultant say? If they can write a report that says that they are satisfactorily happy with it and that their PI is backed up against those comments, then we, as the registered building control approver, are accepting of that. But effectively, they are doing away with any responsibility for them to sign things off as such, which is obviously a massive change. So what this is doing is placing an emphasis on the designer and the contractor. So Aura being a principal designer, if that's who ends up being the principal designer, most of the time, and I do think it's the right way of doing it. Your architect is the person that's kind of the glue that's pulling all of the design together. They should know about sort of all of the nuts and bolts and the processes that you've gone through to get to this point. They need to be competent and they need to understand what they're doing. And ultimately, they are taking responsibility for that design and making sure that it's compliant. So it's over to the designer and the contractor to ensure compliance with the building regulations and not the building control body as a route to compliance, which is basically what I've just said. So building control won't take any responsibility. It's over to us now as the principal designer, your architect, your design team, and your principal contractor who's actually installing it to make sure that it complies with building regulations. So massive change. How that affects XP as the client, as the developer, it effectively means more money for us, like everything. Build costs have gone up, professional fees have gone up, insurances have gone up, and all this is going to do is push consultant fees higher, because instead of there being a reliance on building control saying, yes, we're happy with that, off you go, all of these consultants will be putting their PI on the line and effectively approving things to say that they are of the understanding that it complies with building regulations and they are the design body responsible for it. So going back to Grenfell, it's a case of all of those people within that supply chain, consultants, contractors, it's over to them to make sure that what they're building and what has been designed is compliant and is safe, effectively. That's fundamentally what the Building Safety Act is, to make sure that we are building safe houses, safe properties for people to occupy. So from a developer perspective and a client perspective, it's just going to be more money trickling through the system, which reduces margins because, like Jack said earlier, landowner expectations are still where they are. They're not being reduced. They don't give a shit about this. And it's just going to be less profit margin ultimately for the developer at the tail end. So big changes, Building Safety Act. Make sure you understand what it's all about. Expect your consultants to be charging more over the next couple of years whilst this all kind of settles through. Because at the moment, even building control bodies, old approved inspectors, don't really understand fully what's going on. They're still making this transition, and it's very, very difficult. And I'm not going to even touch HRBs, which is high-rise buildings, because that is a whole different process in itself, and it's causing huge delays for a lot of developers in London that build skyscrapers and high-rise buildings above 18 meters, because it's becoming way more difficult to get that process approved. Cool. If you want insights like this into development and SME business ownership, Jack and I do offer sort of one-to-one consultancy calls. Details are on the screen. You can find information on our website, but we've got a huge amount of experience with growing service-based businesses whilst also developing a lot of property. So yeah, we're here to help. We love doing it. I love getting into the nitty-gritty of other people's businesses and trying to find ways in which we can tweak and improve and make things better, solve your sort of problems. So yeah, do get in touch if you want some consultancy. Jack, you're going to say something, sorry.
Yeah, I was actually just going to say something, a funny story about the Building Safety Act and high-rise buildings. We're selling a house, obviously just like a 3-bed, 2-story house, and it's due to complete tomorrow and exchange today. And it got pushed back from Tuesday because the bank wanted to carry out an EWS1 survey on the building.
God, yeah, cladding, yeah.
It's like 5 meters tall, the house, and it's like the most cookie cutter house. No, anyway, I just thought I'd share that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a nightmare. Everyone's running scared, which means that nothing gets done. No one's willing to actually make a decision, and everything costs a lot more. So, yeah, wise words about time and money. Go for it.
Yeah, it's quite a broad, generalised thing, but a friend of ours, Dorian, shared this like time tracking thing where someone I think it was actually Harvard, did a study on where the top CEOs of all the businesses in the world spend most of their time. And I think something like 80% of it is firefighting. That's normally where business owners that are not just doing new business is another top one, but also firefighting problems, really nitty-gritty, bespoke problems that arrive in the business, fixing the problem, and then getting back to their work. And I just wanted to sort of share this because we, day in, day out, we deal with problems. And I'm not talking about problems where a planning application is difficult to get over the line. That's a day-to-day normal problem. But bigger stuff where a bank might pull out because of the refinance and you've been working on it for 9 months. And another developer, this is Ronan, his wise words were, in business, when there's a big problem, you need one of two things and sometimes both of them. That's more time and more money. And I just loved it because it's so true. Yeah. And if you take a step back with every problem and think about that, how can I resource more time and more money? You can normally resolve that problem a lot easier. And we've had to do a bit of time buying on a refinance that we've got going through. We've got a private lender that's set us the first charge, and we've had to extend it the second time because of refinance delays. And it was just sharing that with our listeners, really. If you're a business owner out there and you've got a big problem, what could you do to buy more time, and what could you do to find more capital to help ease that problem and speed that problem up?
I think this is our constant problem, isn't it? Normally the money thing, but God, that's pretty much life of an entrepreneur. But you got to be resilient in this game, that's for sure. It's tough.
My business growth expert on the Goldman Sachs, we were chatting when I was at my residential the other day, and we were talking in our business about cash flow. And one of the guys in my growth expert group, he sells like artisan watches. So people pay for their watch 3 years before it's built. So his problem isn't cash flow. His problem is speeding up the service. And I was like, and I said, it made me laugh. I said, cash flowing a development company is such a nightmare. And she just went, why are you doing it then? I was like, whoa.
I've been wondering that for a while now. It's fucking hard work. Yeah, fair. I mean, she's to the point, isn't it? No messing around.
Why are you doing it? I was like, question.
Cool. So some really great news. I mean, this has been the last 2 weeks. I think we've been sharing. We've got more sales at St Andrew's Court, and it does keep flowing, which is amazing. So Jack met with someone on Saturday on site who wants to take this one bed up here, which is flat number 6, top floor, with the nice terrace, with the mezzanine decks. This flat here on the left hand side in the CGI, which is great. And we managed to agree, I think, asking price for that, didn't we, with the car parking space as well. But the bonus was that he actually wants to buy the one next to it as well for pretty much asking price. And I think we're throwing in the an extra car parking space for free. But in terms of percentage on GDV of where we expected that to be, it's sort of a 2 to 3% drop, which is amazing. So at the moment of phase 1, I think we've got 3 under offer. We've got 1 unit in phase 2, which is currently under offer. And I'm fairly sure I just need to catch up with Ian this afternoon because he had a viewing earlier this week for a 4th viewing, actually, to see where he got to with that. So we could have 5 units sold of the 20, and we only launched fully to the market last week. We've got an open day next Saturday on the 5th of October with a couple of private viewings on the 3rd and the 4th. And the outreach and the inquiry levels so far have been amazing, which is great. I was speaking to an agent just before this call just to get his view on where things are at. And he's sort of saying, it's still really stagnant and things are struggling. He's based in London. So I think from a price point perspective and the way that interest rates sort of affect those higher cost areas is obviously a little bit more different to affluent market towns like this, where it's $450 a square foot resale and things are being a little more fluid and people seem to be not sitting on their hands as much. They realise that the interest rates are sort of in a decent place. All arguments say that it's going to continue to kind of go down, and we'll see what the budget says in October. But there seems to be a little bit more fluidity and people making decisions, which is great.
Yeah, it's actually the site we were obviously talking about. We couldn't find any sales comparables, and it's really nice actually seeing the sales take place and it be sort of roughly where we wanted them to be. And for our listeners out there that might be developers, it's probably worthwhile sort of expressing how we analysed the GDV when we didn't really have any comparables. Obviously, we went to multiple agents and did our own homework, but we also looked at what is our break-even exit value, and it was something like 25% off what we've actually sold them for. So rather than actually trying to get a really accurate figure on what it's going to sell for, because you may not know yet until you list them on the market, you may just be thinking about what is the sort of minimum threshold that we need to hit, and do we want to manage that risk and take that risk?
Yeah, nice. I'm looking at this mezzanine stair, and the last 2 days I've been fighting with building control to try and get them to accept this mezzanine paddle stair, because at the moment they are not. And it turns out that the stair itself does not conform to building regulations. So I don't know why they're selling a product that the tread is 15 millimeters too short. Yeah, they're selling this on the open market, which is not ideal, but we'll get there. I've already found a product for 1,500 quid that is a compliant paddle stair that we can replace it with if needed. But yes, front of mind at the moment, that paddle stair. Cool. If you want to learn from Jack and I in a boardroom setting, so instead of the sort of one-to-one direct consultancy, you want to learn from other developers that are doing, amazing things and growing their own businesses, then the boardroom is probably for you. We talk about goals and achievements and hold people accountable to make the right steps and move their businesses in the right direction. We'll look at deal clinic opportunities. So if you're looking at deals and want some insight to crowdsource knowledge and experience from around the group and find out ways in which you can sweat those assets and add value and, phase schemes and talk about all those good things that we've discussed already today. And then the boardroom group might be right for you as well. So comment boardroom below or get in touch and we can send you a full detail breakdown. Cool. We're on to quickly the Q&A. We had Curtis last week ask a question at the end of last week's episode. We have been struggling to calculate the GDV of residential properties that we are considering to convert into 6-bed HMOs. We will not be using a commercial valuation. So I guess the question is, any tips on what Curtis can do to value 6-bed HMOs? You said you're looking at one at the moment, Jack.
Yeah, I mean, it's super difficult. And that's the fundamentals is we've had valuers, 2 different valuations before, and they've been 20% apart. So to some degree, it's super difficult to predict. But you've got to put a value in your sheet. You've got to drive a value forward to understand whether you can buy it, how it's going to work. And it is a variable at the end of the day. You will find that you will deliver HMOs and some will value up stronger than you think and some will value up where you thought and some will value up less. And the answer to that is just do more deals and it sort of kind of all balances itself out. But the way that we actually do our own work from HMOs is we normally base our HMO valuations on bricks and mortar valuations. It's slightly difficult because you've got a 5-bedroom family home and a 6-bedroom HMO. Is there a family that would want a 6-bedroom house? Probably not. That is still
it's just very specific between north and south. I'd say there's a big north-south divide in this question, isn't there?
Sure.
Because
the
north won't be doing a bricks and mortar valuation. But I guess correct. He's angling at this that they won't be using a commercial valuation. So I'm assuming they are more south than they are north.
Yeah, some lenders will actually take a commercial valuation under 7 beds, but the typical threshold is 7 bedrooms. Completely right. If you're up north, a friend of mine's a developer in Darlington, if he can't get a commercial valuation, the deal doesn't stack. But in our areas where it's higher capital value, Ben mentioned Tame is 450, our HMO in Henley is like 550, 600 a square foot. But we do a bricks and mortar valuation. So to give you an actual case study, we have a 6-bedroom HMO in Henley on Thames. We bought the property for 500k. Very tired, needed a lot of work. The ceiling value in that estate is 50 houses in the estate. Ours is actually the biggest house, coincidentally. And we did break the ceiling value in refinance. And I think previously houses have sold for 750 to 775. So we had around 750, 775. We always tell valuers higher than we expect because we put in a buffer for them to play silly buggers and chip it anyway. And we ended up getting that building revalued at 800k, which is kind of about right. 775 is a good value in that state. We'd just redone the whole house, replaced the electrical, heating systems, etc. And what we can't ignore is it brings in about 80 grand a year gross rent. So, even though valuer is not taking in a valuation on a yield, they will still take in the fact that it's high cash flowing. And I feel that sometimes gives them the confidence to value it up higher on a pound per square foot value rather than being very. So, because if we're buying an £800,000 building that's bringing in a 10% gross yield, that is really, really strong in Henley on Thames. So it kind of helps usher them to the right direction. But the easiest way is see if there's any comparable HMOs that have been valued or sold. Speak to a local agent that's dealt with HMOs if possible. If you're in an area where there isn't any, I think you'd be safe to value it on a bricks and mortar valuation at the exit. So look at comparable stock that's recently done and in good quality condition. When we convert our HMOs, we try and do them we try to sympathise with actually, we don't want to just create almost like a student house that's so obviously it's got double ovens, double fridges, and it looks really ugly and it's very transactional. We try and still keep it as a bit of a homely feel with flowing open plan kitchen, dining space, cinema rooms and things like that. So it's super difficult, but see if you can get those comparables together, and if not, base it on a bricks and mortar valuation. So if things in that area are selling for 400 a square foot, if they're done up nicely in that on that road or in that estate, that should be a good starting place.
I think I was listening to your Ground Up podcast and Stuart was talking about, it's difficult for the first one, but once you've got one over the line, effectively you've got a valuation on paper, and you've done one of those projects where you can say to the next person that on the next project, you can say to the valuer, look, here's what this one was valued at. And the more you do, the more in a specific area you work in, you get a really good grasp of where it should come out and, you know, where the spread should be. So yeah, difficult one, but, you know, best of luck with your HMOs, Curtis, and let us know how it goes, and comment down below if you want any other advice.
It is also common, just a tip that I've seen, we've done it a couple of times before, where you get a independent valuer to do a desktop or even a physical valuation first, so that you have that in your ownership. You can share that with no one, or you could share that with everyone. Once that's done and you get a good value on that bit of paper, you can then actually give that to the valuer to make sure that they don't completely screw you over at the tail end on a refinance. So that's a little tip that you could, it costs money, but it also means that if you're not leaving an extra 30k of capital because it hasn't valued up where you need to be, that value might be well spent.
Nice. Very good. And on that note, please do subscribe to the channel to get notifications. We are live every Friday at 5 p.m. Do like and comment and share it with anyone you think will get value from it. And until next Friday, we will be releasing the podcast at noon on Tuesday, but we will see you next week.
These live Q&A episodes are all about helping you grow your business and build a property portfolio that provides financial wealth. If you have specific topics that you'd like us to discuss, make sure to comment on the platform you're listening on, or email info@xpproperty.co.uk so that we can discuss your topic in future episodes. And if you found these conversations valuable for growing your business, make sure to click that follow button, and we'd really love for you to tell just one person about us. Thank you.